But yeah, so I remember going to St. Thomas Aquinas, and I remember sitting there, and I would arrive early. And you used to have this habit, and perhaps you still do, of walking around the church before Mass starts, and you'd say hello to people you didn't recognize. And I can remember you coming over and saying, "Hi, I'm Father James. What's your name?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm Dan. It's nice to meet you." And I got to be honest, the first time that happened, I was floored. I was blown away that you cared. I mean, like it sounds trite, but I mean it sincerely. Like it made a big difference, an impact on me. And so next week, when you did it again, and you walked over to me and you said, "Hi, I'm Father James Brown. Who are you?"
I was going to say, I wondered if he remembers that or not.
I've had some embarrassing moments with
I don't want these horror stories to dissuade people, because I was on the receiving end. I was the person who you came up and you introduced yourself to 3 weeks in a row and asked me who I was. But it made a difference to me. So like, even if you get it wrong, even when you make the mistake, it conveys something, right? It conveys a sense of hospitality, a sense of welcome, and that matters.
Yeah. Well, I've always been driven with a conviction that, on a weekend, my radar is up for new faces.
Yeah.
And it can be a difficult thing because you have some very wonderful, beautiful, familiar faces who want to surround you and take, and take charge of your time, either before Mass or afterwards. And I'm always scared. I never want to be inattentive to anyone who's speaking with me. We've all had the experience, you're talking to someone and they keep looking over our shoulder and you're like, that person doesn't want to talk to me. So it's tough because I want to give all my attention, and yet I know that there are people that are visitors and I want to welcome them.
Yes.
And it's like, come on, people, let's get in on this together. So
why stand at that front door? Why? What? Because you're literally standing outside, and in Canada, it can actually be a cold experience to be standing outside. Why are you doing it?
Well, for me, it's like I do want to welcome people, and it's so important to me, and I want to go above and beyond. Like for me, and the other reason is I wasn't on the hospitality team, and that was one of the doors that actually wasn't manned by the hospitality team. So if I went out there, I wasn't replacing anybody's job. So
that's right.
It was because, to be honest with you, it's my favorite thing to do in the whole church is to be there to welcome people. It's my favorite role in the entire church.
Because I don't think we understand, for the unchurched person, the emotional stress it is to visit a church for the first time.
Yeah.
Well, think of the story of Jen, and maybe some of our listeners are familiar with her story. Now, Jen, a couple of years ago, hadn't ever been connected with church, and she, going through a difficult period in her life, was walking by, and she decided to come in on a weekend, but she stayed in the foyer because she felt absolutely terrified. Like, we're going to find out who she is, and we're going to throw her out, and she's not going to be welcome, and she was actually really, really scared and felt that she was going to be judged. She was going to be condemned. She would not be welcomed. But as the weeks went on, as God began to work in her heart, and as she experienced hospitality from not just those in the hospitality ministry, but from the people in the pews, people who recognized that she wasn't, someone who came all the time, they began to reach out to her, and slowly she came through the doors and was at the back of the church, and then sat at the back, and then eventually she took Alpha and had a big conversion. Now she's leading ministries, and she's the MC on our latest Alpha. But what struck me the first time I heard her testimony was like, oh my goodness, I'm so out of touch with what it feels like to walk into our church. If you haven't been going to church,
I always go back to St. Paul's words in Colossians 4, and at the first part of that chapter, he says, be wise in the way that you act towards outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. And he's not necessarily speaking to how you do church on a weekend, but I don't think you can certainly apply the passage to how you do church, right? I think he's probably more talking about our daily interactions with people, but he's saying be intentional about when you're coming in contact with someone that doesn't know the person of Jesus, and recognize your interaction matters, whether that's one-on-one or whether that's in a public setting.
Had tons. We've sent 10,000 mystery guests now since we started in churches all across the United States of all different Christian faiths.
That is amazing.
The beauty is they get to be anonymous. I think that's part of it. Also, it helps that we pay them. So, it's actual market research. We pay them to go into the church and to share what their experience is. And the fact that they get to be anonymous is very helpful because they know that the church isn't going to know who they are, and that they can share honest feedback about what it was like for them when they came. And they're not going to have anybody coming up to them or identifying them in that way. One, my husband's in ministry. We've got, a large church. We see people come. And we see people not come back. And and I think this is true for any church, while we know there's a percentage of people that come and they don't come back because of just where they're at in life, right? It's not because maybe they didn't feel unwelcome. It's just sometimes people just reject the church and they reject the whole idea of a relationship with God. So that's one. The other reason I think is that there are people that don't come back because they just feel plain out rejected by the church. And so my heart behind this, when we weren't seeing people coming back, is I'm like, it's one thing if they reject God. It's a whole another thing if they leave because they feel rejected by us. I'm like, that's something that we can do something about. And that's something I want to do something about. And then the second reason for starting this is I've always had a heart for making people feel welcome. I grew up unchurched almost all through my younger years into my 20s. And it really wasn't until I was almost 30 years old and had just, some difficult things going on in my life where I began to explore the idea of, what would it be like to be a part of church and to have a relationship with Christ. And I can remember the experiences growing up that kind of prevented me from wanting to go back to church. And what I've said to many people is it's not necessarily that anybody in the church set out to make me not feel welcome or reject me. It was more that I didn't understand what was happening. I was kind of confused about, just everything that would happen. And this is especially true, for the Catholic Church. And so many people don't know what's going on or how to participate or even how to learn about it and connect with somebody. And then there were often experiences where I'd come in and just no one would talk to me. And again, it wasn't that I think they saw me and said, we're not going to talk to her. It's just simply they get busy with one another and with their family and their kids. And so that was the sort of thing that prevented me from going so long. And I thought, those are things we can do something about.
Well, I think we've got to acknowledge that for many people, the decision to actually show up at any kind of church at all is, especially if it's not part of what you do, is absolutely enormous. It's huge. And most people probably have done a lot of soul searching or research. They've gone online. If you have something that's online, they've looked at it. They've been on your website. And they've already journeyed quite a bit, so that they're taking the next step, and to open that door and to walk in. It's said that within, I think, the first minute of walking into the church, people have, in a sense, have made up their minds, because it's that first impression. Am I going to be welcomed? Is this going to be scary? Is this a safe place? So I think hospitality and welcoming, even a smile, can cover a multitude of sins, a multitude of sins of omission. But often that's sadly the last thing that people experience when they.
It's so important that churches that they make welcoming a priority.
If you just think about it in secular terms, if you go into any restaurant, you go into any bookstore or any business, and you walk in and you don't feel welcome, I mean, what's the likelihood of you returning to that? And how much more important is the work we're doing at the church? So it just in terms of importance, I mean, when somebody walks into a church for the first time, you are representing God to them. And when they don't feel welcome, then therefore they might not feel welcome by God. And so how important is that? I think it's hugely important. I think it's, it's baseline number one, very important that people come in no matter where they're at in life or what they're coming in for, or if they've been away or they grew up in the church and fell out of regularly attending, no matter where they're at in life, they should come in and always feel that they've come home.
It's fundamentally a dimension of love. I mean, Jesus himself said, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. This is one of the core commandments that the Lord gives us. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I think of the letter to the Hebrews that, speaking about welcoming people, that reminds us that many have welcomed angels unawares. Like, you don't know who it is that you're actually but welcoming. And even the words of Saint Benedict in his famous rule, so this rule of the Christian life that impacted the church for centuries, he says very, very plainly in his rule that the guest is Christ. Like, when we welcome a guest, we welcome Jesus himself, that we are to honor guests as Jesus. Now, imagine a gathering of a church on Sunday morning, and Jesus actually walked through the door, like he's returned. He walks through the door, and he got a grunt from a grumpy usher and told to and ignored. I mean, we would flip out, right? We would flip out, and yet the guest who comes into our midst, we welcome him. He said, whatsoever you do to the least of these, you do unto me.
Amen.
You know, so that's another part of it as well, is that we're to, that's an extension of love, of the command to love.
I came back from England recently and went to a Stephen Langridge church in Richmond. And I was going in the side door, and David caught me. He said, no, I want you to go in the front door, get the full experience. And sure enough, and they've only been in the network for a year, and hospitality was spectacular. But the thing that moved me the most was I sat by myself. Like, there was people around me, but I was, you leave enough space because you're not right up against somebody when you have a pew. And anyway, when I was leaving, I decided to leave out the side aisle. And I turned and started walking. Well, the woman must have stepped over her husband in a hurry and ran down the aisle and tapped me on the shoulder. And she said, "Hi, are you new? Are you visiting?" And she went way out of her way to talk to me. And I told her I was from Canada. And she just, "I'm so glad you're here. I hope you enjoyed the worship." And she was just so... And she wasn't a staff person. That was just a lady in the pew. She was much older than me, and just went way out of her way because she saw something.
Well, this goes to what Melanie was saying, right? Because I mean, the question of, it's not about so much the tactic of hospitality and making sure you've got people standing, but it's the culture.
Things, but some of the things that we've heard, of course, the sad stuff is people walking in and not feeling welcome at all or being spoken to. Things like, when somebody walks into church and they do see a first-time guest for the first time and they're not sure how to, approach them. So sometimes they overwhelm them or they get really awkward and say things like, "Are you here, to visit the clothing closet? Do you need something?" They're not expecting this.
Please tell me that's never actually happened.
Oh no, it's happened. For sure, it's happened. Being ignored, obviously, that's a big one that we see a ton of. But we also see where people walk in and they are welcomed in a way that, like you described with Alpha. I mean, a good coffee and friendly conversation, and it's comfortable. It's non-judgmental. I was sharing with some folks recently. One of the stories that really touched me recently is we had a single mom of 2 kids visit a church for us in Minnesota, and she does not regularly attend church. In fact, she's not even sure if she believes in God. And she shared, based on her experience, she said it was the most welcoming experience she had ever had in a church. And she also went on to say, she said, and it's noteworthy to tell you that my kids are 13 years of age, and they've never stepped foot in a church in their entire life. And the person I was talking to about that, I said, it made me kind of sit back and think about that for a minute. And I said, we have to remember that there are actually people that have never stepped foot in a church for a wedding, a funeral, a service, any of that. And I was just, we make that assumption everybody's had some sort of experiences, but the truth is there are plenty of people, especially that younger generation, that has not been raised in the church. We can't assume that they've had that kind of exposure. So that was, awesome. What mattered most to you when you're thinking about returning for an initial visit? And consistently, the top 3 things that we see that are ranking the highest are the friendliness of the church. So to feel like the people are friendly, and not just pastors or people designated to do so, but as you said, the culture. You expect that a pastor or maybe a greeter is going to say hello to you. I always tell churches, they're like, "Well, we have greeters," and I'm like, "Well, having a greeter doesn't make you special, okay? You don't stand apart from any. You don't stand out from any. Most churches have greeters, and most businesses will greet you when you walk in. So that doesn't really. It's important, but it's not a distinction. What we have found is that friendliness really is found in when folks are greeted by the people that didn't have to greet them. Like, Ron, you told the story about somebody got up, just one of the parishioners got up and said, "Hey, I don't think we've met before. I'm so, is this your first time here?" They took an interest. And so that's the thing that really stands out in friendliness. The other 2 are that are important to people are what they hear, the message, right? The homily. And the speaker, the pastor, whoever is speaking and delivering it, they want to have sort of a feeling like they're comfortable with that person. Not that they know everything about them, but they have, how it is where you kind of how do you feel good about this person? Do they seem like they're okay? That kind of thing. Are they a good speaker, a good communicator? I mean, it's really important. Nobody wants to come back to a church that's mediocre. They can spend their hour to 2 hours doing anything on a Sunday. And we're competing with that, right? We're competing with, Starbucks and football and time with family and all those things. So message, pastor, speaker, the welcome, very important. And then in the opposite direction, the reasons that people won't return, obviously, is when they don't feel welcome at a church. To a mediocre experience, meaning they sat through an hour of meh. Just they didn't understand it, they didn't connect to it, and there was nothing inspiring to them. And then also there's actually four things we see a lot, but I just mentioned the first two, but the last two are, if they've got kids, they come to a church that doesn't have very many kids or families, that is not, even if the church is welcoming, friendly, and they might have liked the homily, at the end of the day, there is a desire to go where people are that have other families, because they want their kids to grow up and, peer to peer. I mean, they want to do life with people that are like them. And so, yes, first impressions are important, but, farewell impressions are important too. Farewell ministry, we like to call it, or farewell hospitality. People remember the first thing they experience and they remember the last thing they experience. And so, how you connect with people after the service is very, very important.